Brought to you by concordiatheology.org, bringing you resources that support the vigorous life of the mind in service of the gospel of Christ.
Welcome to Tangible, Theology Learned and Lived. We're exploring the ways in which theology permeates all aspects of life. Through conversations with faculty at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis, we will challenge you to deepen your theology and live out your faith in Christ. I'm your producer and host, Jessica Bordelot. I'll talk with a variety of professors on a variety of topics, something different every episode, but all pointing to the intersection of faith and daily life, because it's tangible, theology learned and lived. Today, we're discussing how brain hemispheres influence the way in which we interact with the world and how those changes may impact our faith life. To discuss, Dr. David Maxwell and Dr. Stephen Pietsch. Dr. David Maxwell has been a professor of systematic theology here at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis since 2004. He's the chairman of the Department of Systematic Theology. His primary research area is in the early church of the 4th through 6th centuries, and he's published translations of ancient Greek writings from that time. He is also an avid organist, and he is crazy about Bach. I know because I've heard him talk about Bach. Dr. Maxwell, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jessica. It's great to be here.
Dr. Stephen Pietsch is Associate Professor of Practical Theology at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis since 2023. Dr. Pietsch was a parish pastor for 19 years and served at Australian Lutheran College, where he taught graduate and doctoral students in the area of pastoral care and homiletics. He was also the director of pastoral formation. Dr. Pietsch, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jessica. It's good to be here again.
Our discussion today is based on the work of Iain McGilchrist. McGilchrist is a psychiatrist, philosopher, and neuroscientist who combined those fields in his book, The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. Just that title sounds like half a book. I'm interested in seeing how Dr. Maxwell and Dr. Pietsch can make such a heady book tangible. Let's start by defining the terms, the divided brain. So I was taught that our brains have two sides. Left side controls logic, math, science. Right side, creativity and emotions. Am I on the right track?
Well, probably not.
Tell me more.
Well, McGilchrist talks in his book, early on in his book, Master and His Emissary, about the fact that that was kind of a popularization of science that happened back in the 1980s, perhaps a little bit into the 1990s too. It's an oversimplification of the way the two hemispheres of the brain work. Neurological research has shown in the last 10 to 15 years is that, in fact, they're not compartmentalized. Both hemispheres of the brain are involved in everything we do. The question is, how do they cooperate? And so that's really the question he sets out to answer in his book. And his answer to that question is actually extremely interesting, surprising, and fairly important, I would say.
An image that he uses to illustrate this is if you're a bird eating a seed, there's two things you need to be able to do. You need to focus on that seed, but you also need to keep a lookout for predators in your environment. And so this kind of illustrates the difference between what the two hemispheres or what their priorities are. So he puts it that way. They have different agendas or different priorities. The right hemisphere is more about the big picture, taking in new information, whereas the left hemisphere is about focusing on the smaller, focusing on small details. It's very good at categorizing things, but it's not very good at handling new information. It feels that what it knows, there's nothing else beyond what it knows, and so it handles its own categories and works within its own categories.
So the right hemisphere is the hemisphere that attends to the world and looks at the world with a sense of openness and what McGilchrist calls betweenness. So you're directly experiencing the world around you. You receive that experience, you receive that knowledge or information or impression, whatever it is. And so the left hemisphere then thinks, right, I've got this fantastic storeroom of stuff that the right hemisphere has received. And so what happens then is, like Dr. Maxwell was saying, is that you end up with a closed, self-referential system in which the left hemisphere is just regurgitating and repackaging and representing what it already thinks it knows. And this is it's interesting, in the book, McGilchrist talks about the fact that sometimes the left brain demonstrates that it really does think it knows everything, and it is supremely confident of what it knows. And so this left hemisphere approach to attending to the world then is kind of a flat informational way of relating to it. It's not a way of relating to the world that allows the world to presence itself to you in the moment. No, the moment is gone. The left hemisphere is got sound bites or recordings or records of the moment that's already gone. And that thinks, well, that's all you need.
You'll have to explain that more to me, because it does seem like that's all you would need, right? You get all the information of what's going on around you. Isn't that all that we would need to have?
Well, one difference that goes along with this is for the right hemisphere, it finds meaning relationally. So it's attuned to context and relationships as fundamental, and the left hemisphere is not. So do you think that truth is reducible to, let's say, logical propositions, and that's all you need? Or is there some kind of relational context that actually would impact what those logical propositions need?
Yeah, once you start thinking about this, all sorts of examples come to mind. But another one is, okay, you fall in love. That is a kind of, we could say it's emotion, all right, it's emotion. It's also knowledge. It's just a deep human experience. And you have to have an authentic presence of the other person for that to work. You can't fall in love just using your left hemisphere, right? You need to be present in the moment relationally, and you need to be with the person, and you need to be receiving that. You have knowledge of them, you have experience of them, and the right hemisphere, you need that to have that experience, because the left hemisphere has only got the stuff that's kind of been catalogued and categorised. And
like a dating profile online?
Yeah. So it's knowledge, and it's interesting, many philosophers and theologians have known this for a long time, is that real knowledge, what you could call wisdom, is not something you can record and put away. It's relational. It's between us and God. It's about being in the moment and being authentically present. And so when we are in church listening to a sermon, for example, and we are receiving that word, as we receive that, our right hemisphere is taking it in and finding its meaning, and it might pass it then to the left hemisphere, who remembers it and thinks about it and categorises it, but you can't do that, and you can't have access to it unless the right hemisphere gets involved.
So let me see if I understand this correctly. So someone's mom is listing the characteristics of the man she wants her daughter to marry, who she hasn't met yet. She's giving information, but he has a job, he has a car, he has brown hair. But she won't fall in love with him till she meets him and has experiences knowing how they get along together and spend time together. Is that, am I spitting it out correctly?
That's not a completely exhaustive explanation, but I think it is. I think it is true.
I'm on the right path.
Yeah. Have you ever heard this C.S. Lewis thing called meditation in a tool shed? He was in his tool shed one day in Oxford, and it was a sunny day outside. He'd gone in there to get some garden tools, and the door slammed behind him, and there was a crack above the door. and sunlight was streaming in through this crack above the door. And as he was standing in the tool shed, he saw this beam of light coming in through the top of the door, and he was looking at the beam of light from outside, and he could say, "Oh, look at that! And there's dust floating around in it." He was looking at it, and just seeing the whole thing and noticing its features and its phenomena. And then he did something else. As he stepped forward to pick up whatever tool he was looking for, he stepped into the beam of light. And that was a totally different thing. He was encountering the light firsthand. And so he started to look along the beam of light, through the crack above the door outside, and he saw the sky outside. And he said these are two sorts of experience, two sorts of knowing. He called one enjoying the beam of light, and the other one contemplating the beam of light. And so I think that's a kind of a bit of an analogous thing, that the left hemisphere is not comprehensively involved. It's got a dispassionate, unvaluing kind of understanding of the things that are going on or the things that have happened. It's got that all catalogued. But the right hemisphere is the part that steps into the beam and looks along the beam and has the first-hand, direct, present experience. And and you can imagine then, if you're starting to think about people's spiritual life, you can see how important it is that we don't just have the left hemisphere way of doing things, but we need the right hemisphere way of doing things.
So
it's like an equation versus an experience.
Yeah, that's right. Now, the way this applies to theology is very interesting, because you could argue, and I think McGilchrist thinks that the whole concept of doctrine is a left hemisphere thing, and in fact, when he describes the Reformation, he sees that as an event in history in which the left hemisphere becomes predominant, because he tends to focus on the fact that Protestants tend to not like visual art as much as Catholics and Orthodox do, and that's evidence of a left brain. You got your doctrine and that's all you need. So the experience part is irrelevant. And I find this really fascinating, because you can certainly recognize parts of our tradition in a critique like that, I think. But on the other hand, it seems to me that the basic move in the Reformation is a right hemisphere move. And he doesn't really get into this because he's not, a Reformation historian. But the key move that happens is that we define faith as trust in a promise rather than intellectual knowledge. And so what the Reformation does is it moves theology from ontological categories to relational ones. Now, I said you can sort of see ourselves in a little bit of this critique, so I want to say something about that too. That you have an emphasis in our tradition on like experience is bad, emotions are bad.
Oh,
you
yes,
get Lutherans
yes.
that say this all the time.
Yeah.
And
Don't trust your feelings because they're not real.
What they mean is don't base your assurance of salvation on your feelings, right? But sometimes it comes across as experience and emotions are just something you'd rather avoid, right? Well, now that would be, I think that's open to a critique of being, that's a left hemisphere kind of thing, because emotions and relations and that's belong to the right hemisphere. But what I want to point out, and Timothy Zoll has a whole book about this, that the Reformation itself finds these relational categories not only important, but like that's the key to the whole thing, right? So think about what do we mean by the gospel? What does the gospel do? The gospel brings you comfort, right? And so if it doesn't bring you comfort, it's not the gospel. So the relational piece of it is actually part of the very definition of terms like law and gospel in our theology.
That's that first experiential encounter with the gospel is the key thing, and we need doctrine, but doctrine can't do everything by itself as a kind of a quantity of knowledge or data. I've got another thought about the way McGilchrist talks about the Reformation. It's interesting, he says that Luther's first starting out in the Reformation was very much a right hemisphere one. And he says that it was about Luther wanted to have an authentic encounter, an authentic experience with God. And it was about relational authenticity. And it's interesting that Luther is seeking not to codify and bring everything down into just material that can be written down in a catalogue of doctrine, but there's that relational side of things. It's interesting with Luther that his theology really went in a different direction, and and McGilchrist mentions this, he embraces, interestingly, the real presence. He says, now, this is not something that you can talk about rationally and explain using rational categories.
You're talking about the real presence of Christ in the
Lord's Supper,
yeah. Yes.
The real presence of Christ in the supper. So he says you can't explain that and nail it down and gain certainty about it using rational means. You receive it as a mystery and you believe it by faith. And so the incarnation is the same. It's a mystery that you have to receive through faith. And that's really, it's interesting, we call that the real presence in the Lord's Supper, the real presence of Jesus there in the Lord's Supper. And that really is, in many ways, exactly what the right hemisphere is about, is experiencing the real presence or having that real, authentic encounter, even though it involves a paradox and you can't nail it down with some kind of absolute rational certainty.
So the Lutheran Church has this tremendous, tradition of music. We made a lot of contribution to Western music. So Bach, Pachelbel, Brahms, Mendelssohn, and that doesn't really surface. Though later in the book he talks about Bach as someone who was attuned to both hemispheres really well, and Bach is a good example of what you should be doing according to McGilchrist, I think. So, and one, honestly, as I was reading the book, I had this fear that this distinction between the two hemispheres is a little too powerful. Like you could explain absolutely everything under the sun, and anything you don't like is left hemisphere.
Yes, I have a list from the book. Okay, left brain functions, uses logic, detail-oriented, facts, rules, present and past, math and science, knowing, practical, safe. And then the same words for the right side were uses feelings, big picture-oriented, imagination rules, symbols and images, present and future, philosophy and religion, believes and takes risks. So that was the description that he gave between the left and the right hemispheres. Do you think that's too cut and dry?
Well, you need both of those. You need both the left and the right hemisphere.
I just want to pick up on a phrase that you use about the left hemisphere being a closed system, because that relates to another contemporary problem, which is the crisis of meaning.
Yeah.
That the idea is that everything is just self-referential, and we don't have any experience of some outside transcendent meaning. And I just wanted to mention an example of this that's very fascinating to me. This is a book that we assign in our systematics curriculum by Dreyfus and Kelly. It's called All Things Shining. And this is actually about literature. It's not really about theology. And Dreyfus and Kelly are not Christians, but they are picking up on this crisis of meaning, and their solution is that that you want to look for moments where you experience what they call whooshing up. So the example that they would give
I can't believe you just said whooshing.
That's their term, whooshing up. So like if you're at a football game and the crowd goes wild and you're caught up in the moment, they see that as a kind of transcendent moment. And this is the antidote to the crisis of meaning problem where everything is self-referential. So you need to see the world as shining again, like having meaning again. And it just struck me after reading McGilchrist that you could frame that as a left versus right hemisphere issue.
You could, yep.
So McGilchrist says that it is becoming more prevalent throughout history?
Well, in Western civilization.
Well, he gives this is really what the book is more than anything, is a kind of an historic account of the development of that. McGilchrist describes how there's a steady kind of growth towards the left hemisphere with a few interruptions in history where there's a resurgence of the right hemisphere that rejects this kind of flattened representation of everything from the left hemisphere and pushes back. And there's
like the Renaissance?
The Renaissance is exactly, particularly the early Renaissance, where he says there's this a kind of a rediscovery and an awe-filled rediscovery of humanity and the human life and God's work in the world. Those kinds of things are transcendent or outside experiences that that you have to have the right hemisphere strongly engaged in order for that to happen. But McGilchrist's critique is that Western society relies more and more on science, technology, consistent operating systems which depend on this self-referential, internally consistent system of knowledge from the left hemisphere. We need that. Okay, it's not that science is evil or something, but it's just that if we don't have the right hemisphere engaged, how are people going to learn and grow as people who are able to have relationships, including a living relationship with God? It's about being in the moment to actually be there and see it, feel it, and know it in that moment. And if we cut off that living supply of fresh water to the left hemisphere, we'll just become more and more stagnant.
The left hemisphere is utilitarian, and then the right hemisphere is, I forget exactly how he put it, but it had, I think holiness was actually a concept that played in here.
Yeah.
Religious awe was one of the things that he listed.
Religious awe, yeah.
Yeah, so the right hemisphere would see religious awe as more important than utilitarianism, whereas in the left hemisphere it's flipped. I mean, and so that has to, you can think about what's important in church. Well, I go there to get practical advice, or is the religious awe piece of it a bigger portion? I mean, so obviously both those kinds of things happen in church, but you can't just reduce it to utilitarianism.
From a Christian point of view, we say, well, what gives your life meaning? Well, the one who gives your life meaning is God. He is the external reality who wants to come to you through your right hemisphere. If we cut off all of those, if we just emphasise the left hemisphere and those ways of attending to the world, it just becomes, life becomes a kind of, you're alive because you're alive because you're alive. You get up in the morning because you've got up in the morning for the last 5 mornings, and you just keep doing the same thing. And it's just a sort of a self-referential, self-authenticating system. The right hemisphere wants to look at the meaning of the whole. and it's not about rationality isn't necessarily the last word. Technology is not the answer to everything. And ultimately, the right hemisphere intuits that it cannot ultimately be self-reliant. It's reliant on something from outside.
It surprises me that two theologians are talking this way. Because I would think a lot of people categorize religion as being very left hemisphere. It is a bunch of things you need to learn and rules you have to follow. And they sent me to Sunday school because I need to learn those things. And I would go to church because there's important things that you need to learn.
So this is an interesting thing that you were saying earlier, David, that one of the characteristics that people often attribute to us Lutherans is that we're suspicious of emotions.
Absolutely, all the time.
Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons that I've never bought into this emotions are bad line that so many Lutherans parrot is because I am an organist. And, and so for me, if I'm going to play, the organ for a church service, I have to pick a prelude and a postlude and an offertory. And so how are you going to do that? Well, one way to do it is to think about, well, what's the general mood of the service? And then do I have a piece that matches that mood? Okay, so you're thinking in terms of emotions just naturally, trying to pick the right music for the service because you don't want to, pick, we're in Lent now, so you wouldn't want to pick some really, over-the-top fanfare, because it wouldn't be appropriate, right? Well, those are emotional kinds of judgments that obviously you have to make if you're a musician. And so that's why I've always felt that the emotions have a place. That's my experience with organ music.
So I think the whole idea of unemotional Lutherans is a complete caricature, historically and theologically.
Really? Because I know a lot of
them. Well, I know people, though.
I know people down that end of the spectrum too, that end of the unemotional range. But I also know lots of Lutherans who are up the other end as well. But from just theologically, the Reformation, when you read about the life of the Reformers and the first generation of Lutheran Christians, there's this incredible language of joy. Luther's famous hymn, Lasst uns fröhlich springen, let's jump for joy. And his theology of joy is one of the most important and unique things that comes out in his letters of consolation, in his sermons, his preaching. He talks a lot about, and he responds to the Word of God with his own joy all the time. And he expresses, he has this whole joy vocabulary, which is highly emotional, and not at all the kind of, we see portraits of Luther where he looks like he's just sucked a rotten egg. He's got a kind of a unhappy, dour face.
Too bad our listeners couldn't see the face you made. That was
that's
lovely.
Right. That potato-faced Luther is not and I think we've suffered a lot from that image of Luther as a kind of dour, unemotional theologian whose theology is kind of that way too. Well, I think that's actually a false bill of goods. I think the theology of the Reformation, when you actually look at what it is deeply emotive in the sense that it's joyful. It deals with the range of human emotions and it deals with despair and guilt and pain to do with sin and suffering, but then it also is full of hope because of the fact that we are justified by grace through faith. It's all a gift.
So a listener hears this show and finds that this is a new discovery, that the emotive part of faith is okay and that it's not wrong and maybe even very important. So what would they do then to develop that aspect of their faith?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is the musical side of church. I mean, we already have it. It's just we don't admit it, but but it's there, and so I would say lean into the music.
So McGilchrist says that we need to allow much more room in our lives for beauty, and I think this is the same for us as Christians, is that we need to pay greater attention to the dimension not only of truth in faith, but beauty, and bringing the experience of beauty to people in public worship. And it's not as though we have to invent a whole bunch of new things, right? It's already there.
The final question in the show is always this: what do you want our listeners to remember?
So I would say that you're a whole person. You want to be able to experience things as a whole, and you want to be able to fragment them and analyze them, and then bring them back in service to the whole. I mean, that's basically the movement that McGilchrist is saying you ought to be doing in the book, and I think that works pretty well in theology too.
I'm going to be the man ringing the bell here a little bit. I would say that one thing I think that we need to hear McGilchrist saying from his background of psychiatry and philosophy and social sciences is that he sounded a warning that we also need to hear in the church, which is if we continue to participate in this dominance of the left hemisphere, and we rely more and more on technological and mechanistic means for relating, for educating, for doing things, that can be dangerous. And we want to make sure that as Christians we experience and embrace the mystery of our faith, things that we can't explain in words, things that we can't nail down in some kind of doctrinal textbook, but which are moments that we experience. So I would say treasure your participation in the Lord's Supper. It's a moment of transcendent truth coming to you. Jesus Christ is coming to you. It's a relationship, and you can't get communion through your left hemisphere, right? It's an experience. It's an encounter with God, and it's an encounter also with other Christians as you come to the Lord's table. As you hear the word, it's the same. This is a transcendent wisdom coming to you from God from outside. It's not something that you can codify and produce from what you already know. It's a new word, it's a living word. It doesn't disagree with or contradict our body of doctrine, but it brings it alive for you. And so experiencing those moments, those sacramental moments of mystery through the proclamation of the word and receiving the sacraments, being in public worship, and I think that looking at and receiving what's going on in Christian artwork, sitting down in your church on Sunday morning and looking at what the church and its architecture and everything in it is saying to you. So I think that this is the risk, is that we live in a flat informational world instead of a world where we encounter the living God through his presence coming to us in his word and sacraments. That's what I would say.
Dr. Stephen Pietsch, thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Dr. David Maxwell, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, Jessica.
That's it for today. You can find more episodes of Tangible on all the major hosting apps, our YouTube channel, or on our website, concordiatheology.org. Check it out. We have a lot more free resources there. If you'd like to see this show continue, you can subscribe for free, share, leave a review. I'm your producer and host, Jessica Bordelot. Join me next time when we talk about the intersection of theology and daily life, because it's tangible. Theology learned and lived.